protecting our residents and upholding constitutional protections, but you've turned that on the head. You have actually turned the United States government against its own residents, and you've had multiple chances to take accountability, to apologize to these folks and others across the country, but you have failed to do it. Yours is a case of failed leadership, Secretary. You need to resign, be fired.
Committee will come to order. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Washington for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Secretary Noem, do you know what the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution says?
Search and seizure processes.
Yep. What about it?
Huh?
What about it? What about search and seizure?
It guarantees the right to a lawful search and seizure.
It protects individuals against unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. And I ask you that because I've sent you 3 different letters going back to February of 2025 raising concerns that you are unlawfully detaining U.S. citizens in violation of the Fourth Amendment. It was not until yesterday afternoon, more than a year after I sent you my first letter, that I finally received a response from you stating that ICE has detained 18 U.S. citizens. I want to introduce you to just 4 of the U.S. citizens unlawfully detained by ICE who are not even included in the 18 individuals that you cite in your response to me. They're in this room with us, and I invite each of you to stand as I read your story. Patricia O'Keefe was monitoring ICE agents when they deployed pepper spray into her car vent without provocation. They smashed her car windows, pulled her and her friend out, arrested them for, quote, obstruction, and detained them. Patricia saw an entire area dedicated to detaining U.S. citizens. An ICE agent also said, quote, "You guys have to stop obstructing us. That's why that lesbian bitch is dead," end quote. Referring to Renee Good, ICE detained Patricia for over 8 hours. Ryan Eklund was monitoring ICE activity in his car when ICE agents blocked him and took his photo, then appeared to use that photo to go to his neighborhood and try to intimidate him. He was still in the car when they approached him, pulled him from his car, and put him in leg irons. Ryan was detained for 6 hours. ICE agents shot Wesley Powers with a pepper ball while he was peacefully protesting ICE activity. ICE detained him for 8 hours, gave him no medical assistance, leaving him in clothes that still had dangerous chemical residue. When doctors examined Wesley after his release, the medical professional opinion was that what ICE agents did to him constituted assault. Edmund Higgins is a U.S. Marine Corps veteran. While legally observing ICE, he honked his horn a couple of times, and when he saw agents driving down a narrow road, he actually drove away. But agents chased him until he sought refuge at a local police station. When agents drew their firearms and pointed them at Edmund, well-trained local police officers diffused the situation, but your agents still insisted on detaining Edmund for 6 hours. Secretary Noem, yesterday in the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, you stated that ICE agents may arrest U.S. citizens in the situation where they were obstructing law enforcement or in situations where you have reasons to doubt that they're U.S. citizens. Is that still your position?
I said, or probable cause.
So let me ask each of the U.S. citizens in the audience who were detained. Raise your hand if you were not charged with any crime following your detention. Not a single one of you were charged with a crime. Now raise your hand if any of you were not even asked to prove that you were U.S. citizens during your detention. Not a single one of you were even asked about your citizenship status, making it clear that DHS agents simply don't care that they're arresting U.S. citizens. Now please raise your hand if you were detained by ICE simply for legally protesting or monitoring ICE activity under your First Amendment rights. All 4 U.S. citizens have raised their hands that they were detained simply for legally protesting or monitoring ICE activity. Secretary, these are not 4 isolated incidents. ProPublica's reporting puts the number at over 170 U.S. citizens detained in just the first 8 months of the administration, which doesn't even include Operation Metro Surge in Minnesota. None of these 4 U.S. citizens were charged with a crime. None had their citizenship questioned, and all were lawfully exercising their First Amendment rights. Do you have anything you want to say to them or the millions of American citizens across the country that are watching this and horrified at what your department is doing?
Well, context is critical in each of these situations to know the full range of what happened in each of these situations before and after the incident and their arrest.
Secretary, not a single one was charged with a crime. Not a single one, and they were detained. And let me just reclaim my time for my final seconds. DHS is supposed to be protecting our residents and upholding constitutional protections, but you've turned that on the head. You have actually turned the United States government against its own residents, and you've had multiple chances to take accountability, to apologize to these folks and others across the country, but you have failed to do it. Yours is a case of failed leadership, Secretary. You need to resign, be fired, or be impeached.
The time of the
because
gentlelady-
you don't have the right to lead this
The time
agency.
of the gentlelady has
I yield back.
expired, and she yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey is right.
In the tense silence of a congressional hearing room, a moment unfolded that captured the deep anxieties running through American politics today. Representative Pramila Jayapal leaned forward, her voice firm and unflinching, as she confronted Kristi Noem with a line that would quickly reverberate far beyond the walls of Congress. After recounting a series of incidents involving the detention of American citizens by immigration enforcement agents, Jayapal delivered her final words with unmistakable gravity. You need to resign, be fired, or be impeached. It was the kind of moment that freezes time inside a hearing room. Cameras kept rolling, lawmakers shifted in their seats, and for a brief second, the chamber reflected something deeper than a political disagreement. It reflected a question that sits at the heart of the American system. What happens when citizens believe the government meant to protect their rights has instead crossed a line? The exchange began not with rhetoric, but with a constitutional reminder. Jayapal asked Secretary Noem a simple question about the Fourth Amendment, the part of the Constitution that protects people from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. It is a principle written more than 2 centuries ago, born from a history of arbitrary authority and unchecked power. The founders understood something fundamental, that a free society requires limits on the reach of government. But what unfolded during the hearing suggested a growing concern that those limits may be under strain. Jayapal described several cases involving American citizens who were detained by immigration enforcement officers. Individuals who, according to her account, had been observing law enforcement activity or exercising their right to protest. None, she emphasized, were ultimately charged with any crime. None, she said, were even asked to confirm their citizenship during their detention. As she recounted each story, the hearing room shifted from abstract policy debate to human consequence. A woman pulled from her vehicle, a man placed in restraints while observing activity from his car. A veteran confronted by armed agents before seeking safety at a local police station. 4 people standing in the room as living witnesses to the events being described. For Jayapal, the message was clear. These were not isolated mistakes, but signs of a broader pattern that demanded accountability. Secretary Noem responded cautiously, emphasizing that context mattered in every encounter. Law enforcement situations, she suggested, could not be judged solely by brief descriptions or isolated details. There were always factors before and after an incident that shaped how officers responded in the moment. But the tension in the room remained. Because what this exchange revealed was not just a disagreement about specific incidents. It exposed a deeper divide over how Americans interpret the balance between enforcement and civil liberties. One side warning that the government must maintain strong authority to carry out its responsibilities. The other warning that authority without restraint risks undermining the very freedoms it claims to defend. And this is where the significance of the moment begins to expand beyond the hearing itself. Congressional oversight is one of the most powerful tools built into the American system. It exists because the Constitution assumes something important, that power must always answer to scrutiny. Lawmakers question executive officials not simply to score political points, but to ensure that the machinery of government remains accountable to the people. Yet, in an era of intense political division, oversight hearings often become something more dramatic, a reflection of the country's broader ideological battles. What one side sees as a defense of constitutional rights, the other may see as an attack on those tasked with enforcing the law. The confrontation between Jayapal and Noem captured that divide with unusual clarity. On one side stood a lawmaker arguing that constitutional protections had been disregarded. On the other stood a cabinet official defending the complexity of law enforcement operations. Both speaking not only to each other, but to a national audience trying to make sense of the debate. Because ultimately, the question raised by this hearing reaches far beyond the individuals involved. It is about the nature of leadership in a democratic society. Leadership requires authority, but it also requires trust. And trust is built when citizens believe their rights are respected, even when the government exercises its power. When that trust begins to fracture, every action by public officials is examined through a sharper lens. That is why moments like this resonate so strongly. They force Americans to confront difficult questions about where the line should be drawn between enforcement and liberty. The Constitution offers principles, but it is the responsibility of each generation to interpret and apply them. That process is rarely quiet. It unfolds through debate, disagreement, and sometimes heated confrontation inside rooms, just like the one where this exchange occurred. What happened in that hearing was not simply political theater, it was democracy in motion, messy, contentious, and deeply consequential. Because at its core, the American experiment rests on a fragile but powerful idea: that the government ultimately answers to the people. And every hearing, every challenge, every moment of oversight is a reminder of that principle. The confrontation between Representative Pramila Jayapal and Secretary Kristi Noem will likely continue to be debated by supporters and critics alike. Some will see it as an essential demand for accountability. Others will see it as partisan escalation. But no matter how the moment is interpreted, it highlights something undeniable. The conversation about power, rights, and responsibility in America is far from settled. And perhaps that is exactly how a democracy is supposed to function. The questions are asked, the answers are challenged, the public watches, and the system moves forward, imperfect, but still guided by the belief that truth and accountability must never be ignored. Because in the end, the strength of a nation is not measured by the absence of conflict inside its institutions, but by its willingness to confront those conflicts openly. This hearing was one more chapter in that ongoing story. And if moments like this remind us of anything, it is that democracy demands vigilance from both leaders and citizens alike. If you believe in transparent government, constitutional accountability, and fearless oversight of those in power, stay informed and stay engaged. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA and support our work as we continue to examine the moments that shape the future of American democracy.